The back and the front of the circular tote have three segments. We put them together the same way, whether it's the embroidered or whether it's the red work. So we're going to join them section by section from pinning the net points, which means not in the seam allowance, pinning the net points at the centre and at the very end. Make sure the pinning goes through those stitches, and the same with the other seam. And make sure we've got seam on top of seam, and we're going to stitch just inside the perimeter stitching line so as that edge stitching is not visible from the right side. Okay, so that's going to be a seam that is opened out. We have not stitched, okay, that's nice there, those points are all nice, but we have not stitched into that centre seam allowance. We have stopped just one stitch past the perimeter stitching. Now for the next segment, we do the same thing, corner on corner, stitch on stitch. See how that's open? Place a pin in. I try to do this with actually quilt clips. You just can't do it. You need to use pins. And again, stitch stopping at the point. We need to reinforce. We need to reverse stitch or back tack at the both start and the end of the seam, because we're going to do that one more time. So therefore we've got all those sections, well, there we are, one more time. All those sections will actually meet at the centre. Push. Pins are not what they used to be, that's for real. And again, stitch that seam. When we turn this over after it's been pressed, so we open the seams up and then open the seams up, and that naturally will fold open in the centre, and on the right side it should look absolutely perfect. So we do the same thing for the next side. I love these three panels. You can use three of the same or three different. Hard to decide which one's going to be the top. Again, open these out the same way we did with the Redworks side. So, we now need to mark our quarter points. So seam on seam. I'm just using a white pen here. I normally use a chalk pencil. And then I also want to mark the centre sections of our gussets. And because we got 4 equal length gussets, we can actually put our 2 white marks on, and we can find our centres of our opposing. So we will have not quarters, but we'll actually have eighths. So we'll have a centre and we'll have an end seam, etc. like that. So it's important to find those sections as well, but we can do that just by folding a quarter onto a quarter, and it will give you our eighth mark. We want to transfer these marks onto our lining as well. With our lining, we're going to be adding only 3 gusset sections onto our lining, because we don't require it to be all completed. Our opening at the top is what's going to be stitching to our zip section at the very, very end. So I'm going to put my marks in at the 45. Same method. So there we are. So that's that top section, which we'll leave open. We're going to find these sections here will all go. That's our top section. Then we've got our 1, 2, 3 other sections. That's what these are going to be sewn to. One at the bottom, one at the side, one at the other side, and the top will be open. So those are the only points that we really need. So we have our zip section, which we want to put our square D-rings either side of the zip, because that's what our strap's going to hold on to. So we're going to stitch those within the seam allowance. Then we're going to lay out our gusset and join our gusset, our 3 pieces of our gusset together. Join there, join there. Magic. Seam open, and then we're going to join one more section. This is quite a thick seam, and it's going to be directional. It's not going to be opened out, it's going to go one direction. So just put it together and then stitch very slowly over the bulk, because you've got zip teeth, you've got zip tape, you've got 2 layers of loop that's holding our D-ring. It's going to be quite a thick seam. It looks square here, but it's actually not. It will be round. And then we'll be attaching our sides to it. So we have our round. It's like making a cake tin. And our centres. Find our centre. Just clip that fold so as we find the joining point perfectly. Having notches and marks for guidelines really helps sewing circular seams. And although it may seem a little time consuming, it's definitely worth the effort. I could have done this before attaching the seams, of course. I like to indicate them both sides so as that we have they're quite visible when sewing, because you're going to be looking at the underside while sewing the seam. Now we need to go around the whole edge and clip every 3/8 of an inch or every centimetre. And having marked those notches on the underside, they don't get confused as being a clip. We need to actually clip the edge of the straight so as it sews easily around the edge of the curve. Without that happening, you'll find that the work will not sit fluidly. So, clip, clip, clip. I've clipped on both sides as well. So, we have a centre to a centre, clip. A seam to a mark. A seam to a mark. Now, each of those outside gusset sections are of equal length. So you have 4 of them. So you'll need to look at the quarter marks on your circular side piece. It's very simple. It all fits together. We've tested it. keep it even. I like to sew one section at a time, so I don't go overboard and just clip it and pin or use quilt clips all the way around. I like to sew a section at a time. So what we'll do here, we're going to sew our zip gusset seam onto the edge of our circular seam. And we're sewing from seam to seam. We're sewing to the net. So you've got a straight seam sewing to a curved seam. There's our neck. And we're sewing that seam on the end of our zip gusset. We don't want to sew over it, we want to sew to it, because that's what we're going to be sewing our lining to. Okay, so once we've got all that sewn around the edge, and you can re-sew areas, you can unpick areas. If I've got something caught, I'll unpick it. See, that's the end I'm talking about, the end of the zip seam. Keep those free. We're sewing to the point. You can sew over the ones that are opened out, but not that zip section. So we'll turn that through and just check that we haven't got any stitching from the perimeter stitching showing through. Good chance to give it a little bit of a steam here if you needed to. So there is our first section on. Turn it back through and proceed to put the other section on. Same way, quarters to quarters. Let's pull that through and show you. It really is not a hard thing to do, you just have to be patient with it. As much as I love this being a bag, I can see this being made up into actually cushions. It's a very beautiful little design. That circular edge also is screaming for a row of piping as well, I think. Right, we're going to be making up our lining. So it's the same principle when they're going to, but what we've done is we've actually stay stitched or edge stitched the seam allowance on, so as we know where to clip, and also using the lining so when we go around the bias areas of the lining that doesn't stretch out. So want to again snip the straight edge of the seam allowances. Now, one of the bottom seams, one of the base seams, we're going to need to leave an opening to pull the work through once the project is complete. Okay, so we're sewing to the net. Sew to that point, don't sew past that seam allowance. We're sewing to that point. Okay, so that will be all. And we'll do the same with the other side. Mark it onto quarter. And that's how that will sit around the edge of that. leave one section open. Just sew for a little small bit onto that section, but leave one section open. See, I've left that seam open. Now the other one will be closed. We just want one section to pull the work through. And I have sewn to the net here. So we have a curved seam, stopped on that pivot point there. We've stopped our stitching there. Then we have the straight seam of the gusset. We're going to put the other side on as well now. My notch has disappeared. It's there. I just got to find it. I hadn't gone along far enough, that's why. Right, and we're going to be sewing this around exactly the same way, circle on the bottom of the feed dogs and a straight edge that's been clipped on the top. Leave that section open. And we don't want that second section left over, we want it closed. So you only have a section left over on one side. The other side is actually finished and closed. And there we have the top edge, which is going to be sewn onto our bag on the inside. So our tote bag is turned inside out, and we want to sew curve to curve, stopping at the net at that intersection. That piece there needs to stop on that piece there. So you need to have, we're sewing it in 4 sections, across the gusset, around the curve, across the gusset, around the curve. Those will be sewn together. So let's just, I actually sewed my gusset ends in first, to be honest with you. It was easier. And you want that hole in the bottom of your line to pull it through at the end. So those end bits there, those straight bits there, those little short gusset areas, I sewed those first from net to net. From there to there, just sew across that on that seam, and do the same for the other end as well, because that was going to be all faced out then. And so your lining will hang from that top zip gusset panel. If you can't get right close to the stitching, just come in a little bit. It does not matter if you can't get right close. No one is going to see you stitching on the inside, but you can hand stitch this in if you really wanted to, but there's no need. This is really not hard to do. So stitch across the gut and stop at that corner. I'm using a very old adjustable zip foot. It's just one I like sewing with. It's an old Elna foot from eons ago. And then we sew around our lining to our curved edge of the gusset side seam panel. And we're starting and stopping at that corner like we did with the first section. Okay, so we've done one. Done the ends. We've got one more to do. See, that's all sewn in around the top of that lining, that top of that gusset zip panel. Last seam, pivot or sewing to the net point to sewing to the net point. clip or pin all around the outside edge, and then sew that final seam. Right, so I just put that lining over top of, I just turned it inside out to show you that there was a hole there at the bottom. So you turn it so as the lining sits over the top of the tote bag, and then we turn it again inside out. Very simple finish. There we go. So it's fully lined, and all we have to do is pull that lining out and sew that base seam together. That curve seam, if you just want to just press it along that stitching, that will actually sew together very easily. So I've just edge stitched that seam. You'll never see it. Pop that in. Now, to give this a good press, roll up a towel, a bath towel, shove it in the bag, and then give it a good press with it being stuffed with a towel. That's a great way of actually giving this a finish. Then all we need to do now is to actually put the strap on. So stuffing it with a bath towel is a very good idea. So I've made our strap, and we've got one of the D-rings attached already. So the end that we don't have attached, we thread through, and we use the D-ring slide. So we want to actually, so we've got the slide there. So that will adjust the length of the strap. Then we go around, and we're just going to stitch that through. Pop a clip into it to hold it into place. And voila, we actually have a finished bag. I hope you enjoy this, because I've really enjoyed making this. It's been quite a fun project. You can put zip pockets inside it, you can do all sorts of things there, but it is a fun little bag, it really is.